Hello, we're doing this on my phone today, not on the computer, go figure. Today I wanted to talk about something that I thought would be a lot of fun to talk about, and that would be my opinion on Rails to Trails. Now, I know this might be like, some people are like, well, that's something I gotta react to, what the fuck is wrong? Why would you just really negatively? Because most people probably assume it's a negative thing, even though I am obviously a transit whore, so, I have a whole playlist that's just ever growing, where I just get lost in Google Earth imagining up entire semi-realistic, semi-utopian transit expansion concepts for here in the Pacific Northwest, but let's pretend for a moment that's not the case. Because yes, I don't actually have the most positive opinion of Rails to Trails. I actually don't know which lens is the one that it normally records on. I don't know if it's this one, I don't know if it's that one, I don't know if it's that one. I think it's the top one, but I'm not sure. Anyway, suffice it to say, I may not look directly at you in the eyes and rend your soul by it, but I should. I want to. I just don't think I can do that because I don't know which lens is fucking which. Anyway, I don't exactly have the most positive opinion of Rails to Trails. And obviously this video is to kind of explain why. So, in case you don't know, Rails to Trails, it's in the title, it's titular. But in case you don't understand what it is, it's a nationwide program here in the United States which transforms abandoned rail rights of way, so trackway lines, and turns them into trails, which admittedly I think is a great thing overall, at least on the surface. I have nothing against making as much of a vast, never-ending, always expanding, interconnected, region, not just metro area, but outside of that regions, where you can literally take trails 40 plus miles to a completely different corner of your state. I think that's actually a really cool concept and idea, and the more of those you can implement into cities and metro areas, actually the better, because then the better connected you are, and the better it makes it for pedestrian and bicyclists, so they don't have to take all the major thoroughfares and shrubs and everything else. So, on the surface, it's great. Plus, at the same time, you also have, again, typically, they try to preserve and actually add to some of the wilderness / basically the green space, the green areas, to make it, basically they become like, not all the time, they don't have the right-of-way, the space, but typically they have enough right-of-way that they can turn it into kind of a space where they can plant a bunch of extra trees and other plants and therefore green it up, so that way it not only creates a buffer between the developed areas and thus residential and commercial and industrial, which includes of course warehouses and things like that, but obviously also the main trail or the main roadways and thoroughfares, which is also really cool because it greens up an entire city and metro area. But at the same time, there's also negatives to it, and I feel like the negatives are much more prominent and dominant than any of the positives I've already listed, which is kind of brutal because I like the fact that it's going that way, I like the idea, it's a very good concept, but I don't like it for its main number one negative reason, which is why I kind of am a little shaky on it, but I'm leaning into towards I kind of have a negative outlook on Rails to Trails. And that is because they're, again in the name, they're changing it. They're changing old abandoned railways and trackway into trails. So they're still laying asphalt or whatever else typically. Sometimes it might be gravel, dirt, but usually it's going to be concrete and asphalt. In other words, they're further rendering it to be even more expensive and less possible to be able to potentially resurrect and update to modern electric railway standards these trackways to become a sort of passenger rail service. And that, to me, is a huge negative because we need to be doing everything we can to do the opposite of that. And that is to try to preserve these rights of way and preserve these spaces in what's already there that may be viable or recyclable to really cut down on costs, to be able to then actually turn it into an actual proper passenger rail corridor and bring back passenger rail systems again. And that has infinitely more value than just a handful of freaking pedestrians and bicyclists that might take it to go to work one day or to get their 15 minutes of exercise that they can squeeze in every other day or something during the work week. It's just not something that therefore, in my opinion, is all that intelligent or conducive if you're comparing them to each other. Because one is a completely different beast. It is something that has so much more potential in it that's infinitely positive, pretty much, because it's entirely electric, so it is quieter, at least theoretically, than it will be from conventional rail, although I say that, but you can be over a mile away on Walker fucking Road, have all this residential trees and everything else in between you and the Max line right down here, crossing 185th south of Edgeway and north of Baseline, and you still hear the fucking light rail trains at night as if it's right there in front of you and you're already at the crossing. So it's not as quiet as they claim it is, which is also the reason why they call it light rail, because of the fact that it's lightweight and so it's also electricity, so it's a lot quieter in theory, but actually it's really fucking loud. The way you can hear the electricity pulsing through the lines and then the wheels on the rails is fucking ridiculous how far you can hear that away sometimes. Set fact aside, no derailment intended, no pun intended. No, the pun was half intended. But yes, so personally, I don't like it. Especially considering here in the Portland area, we had the famous, or infamous, depending on how you look at it, red electric railway lines. And that was purely passenger rail. That was during the peak years. And in the grand scheme of the history of the Portland area and of Oregon, it wasn't actually all that long ago that they ended up going out of business and then becoming abandoned to now be replaced with trails. Again, it's a start. It's a good concept, at least on the surface, and I do like it. I'm not completely against it being like this is a horrible thing. Obviously not. It's still a good thing and net positive overall. But if you're comparing it to what we could have done with it, which is to try to do everything we can to be like, let's get together to get as much support as possible and finances if we have to, if it can actually go that far, to be able to at least preserve it, and then set up the plans and get the people involved necessary to be able to actually go and restore it, clear it out, and then start to upgrade it and update it back to, or not back to, but rather to modern electrical passenger rail standards. So that way we can actually start having proper passenger rail lines, not just, again, throughout our metro areas, but throughout, honestly, entire regions of our states. Again, the red electric lines and the Oregon Electric Railway, which were competitors, they literally ran all throughout the Willamette Valley. And there was even, at one point in time, we had a passenger rail line that was entirely passenger rail, not cargo related, that went to Astoria from Portland, which is, I think, hugely important and an awesome detail. Couldn't you imagine being able to take a train to Astoria rather than having to weave your way up to like Highway 30 or all the way around Charlie's Barn, going into, as if you're going to go to Seaside or Cannon Beach, and instead all the way back up through Delray and everything else in Warrenton to get back to Astoria? Imagine being able to go just directly to Astoria from downtown Portland, from Union Station, from even Beaverton area potentially, if that would be possible. And I'm sure there's multiple ways it could be. You could connect it up through 47 and Vernonia, and Claskenai. That would be really freaking cool too, to be able to connect up those two small towns with each other. And then, yeah, you could have a Portland line too. And so then you could actually connect Claskenai and Rainier and Vernonia up with the ability to also go into Portland that way, or via the current transit network, say Max or whatever. You could easily do that as well. And I think that that's really cool, because then you also have legacy rail that's updated to modern standards, and you have that back, but it's kind of like history being updated and brought back to life, which is really cool, but like for the long run, the long haul. And then you have the quote-unquote modern transit networks as well that will get you across and everywhere else you want to go. Relatively reliable. It's not really reliable at all, because it's TriMets, fucking sucks. But anyway, that's a completely different for a different day. The point is that would be really freaking cool. And we literally, with the Rails to Trails initiative, if it instead Rails to Revival, let's call it, then we literally were theoretically that close to being able to actually potentially have a restoration of those rail lines. But instead, now they're all turning into fucking trails. That's why I have it's still neutral. It's not really a positive, it's not really a negative look at Rails to Trails. It's kind of a leaning towards negative in the neutral zone. opinion of rails to trails, and that's exactly why. Because I feel like it's way. Oh, I don't feel like. I should say don't just feel like, because it's also a factually correct statement that it's infinitely more efficient, logical, intelligent, and just a way better use of space and capacity to restore these things into real railroad standards again in the electric fashion, and actually go ahead and give ourselves back so much direly needed passenger only rail lines and thus services, instead of having to fucking share with cargo lines all the time. Of course, that could open a can of worms itself if we actually did get that far and we did have a line and it was really successful, because it was formerly owned by some of these cargo rail lines, whether it was Genesee and Wyoming, or I would call it Guineas and Wyoming, but whatever, aka Pacific and Western, because they own them, so therefore it is technically Genesee and Wyoming. A lot of the Red Electric railways got bought up and taken over by Pacific and Western via thus Guineas and Wyoming. So it would, in theory, if it became back to life all of a sudden, then it was really popular and it was clearly just keeps growing. All of a sudden, they might feel some kind of way, decide, maybe we should try to pull some bullshit lobbying cards and some legal bullshit and standards to be like, actually, we still own it. And therefore, we're going to sue for the rights back. And then suddenly start running it. And then they'll run it into its grave again. And then they'll abandon it again. Because that's how that shit works in this country. But, at least for a little bit, they might actually start to have a knee-jerk reaction and be like, oh, maybe we should take back ownership of that line by some loopholes legally or something like that, because that's profit, potentially. Even though, again, public transit should never be about profit. It should only be about giving a very necessary and required public service. Not anything about giving a fuck about how much money you're making. You should not care. You should be willing to spend into the red damn near infinites to have a proper, high-quality, vast transportation network for there's public, for everybody. You're already paying for it via taxes, so there's no excuse to charge fares. That's my personal opinion. And I'll go into depth about that, and my opinion on that front for a different video at a different time. But yeah, so that's ultimately my kind of opinion of the Red Electric, or I should say the Rails to Trails initiative, because I don't really like it, especially in a localized format. It's kind of functions against restoring Red Electric type services, and that's a net negative to me, not a positive. And so I don't like that at all. Like, it puts me into a pretty big conflict inside about what I want out of it, because yeah, again, it's a vast improvement and it's a step in the right direction. This is the kind of things, the ways that we need to think, and the ways that we need to be able to somehow get the politicians to be willing to, and the companies to be willing to relinquish these rights, so that way they can be like, okay, yeah, let's take it over since they're abandoning it, and then let's actually make some use out of it. And it's a positive use, because it also adds, environmentally, it also is good, because it adds a lot of this green space back again. Kind of add some of the wildland again, sometimes some wetland area again. Sometimes you can remove the damn creeks from culverts and shit and let them kind of restore a little bit of their historic paths and be free-flowing and open again, which is hugely beneficial to everybody and everything that's living. So, I mean, there's a lot of positives to it, yes, and it kind of does reconnect communities, but not in the most efficient, cost-effective way, which would be to restore them to modern electric railroad standards and run them back as passenger rail lines again. And a lot of these companies, even though they abandon them, they still technically have the titular rights to the rights of way. And so as a result, those rights of way have not been encroached upon because of the weird ambiguity in the gray area legally of, oh, well, it's abandoned, but technically it's still tied to the name of the company that owned it. And so because they technically abandon it, it's like, how the fuck do you work that out? Who do you negotiate with? You can't just take it over, because technically, legally, in the gray area, kind of do still own it, even though they abandoned it officially. So it's like, how do you work that out? You pretty much have to get them to like legally put in writing in the digital databases of like, yes, we relinquish our rights and ownership of this land, because in this trackway, this right of way, because it's no use to us. We haven't used it for 40 years, say. So obviously we are admitting it's fully legally abandoned. We relinquish our ownership over it. Then you can do what you want with it, because then at that point, obviously, I think by de facto it goes back to either the states or the counties or the cities. But it's within the jurisdictions of, or maybe it goes up for like an auction, so less a bidding war between each of the levels or something. I don't exactly know how that works administratively, but it's something along those lines. I do know that fact. And so that's how you can do that. But like otherwise, yeah. So my point being though with mentioning all that is the fact that you have these rail lines keep vast swaths of land on both sides of a single trackway. Now imagine if it's double tracked, it's even vaster plot of land that right of way sits in. So I mean, you have a lot of space to toy with and work with, and by modern standards, you have a lot of space to be able to sneak in. If it's single track, like most of say the red electric lines that have been abandoned are and turning into trails, they still have plenty of right of way space to have a safe, a safely and legally spaced, set of tracks, so they can add that second trackway as they upgrade and update the old trackway to the modern. And then you have two tracks, and also you still have space on the sides, which I think is great. Again, like, if you think about it in that context as well, there's so much more value to restoring it and making the effort not to turn them into trails, but rather to restoring it into passenger rail service at a modern electric variety level. And they have all this extra right of way. I mean, it's just absurd to me that we're just acting like that's not the case and we're completely ignoring it. It's actually very frustrating is what it is. Because we were this close. We had the right idea, we had the right opportunity, but then we just diverted. And we're like, actually, let's just make it for pedestrians and bicyclists. Let's do that. And I get that it's like going to be much more politically and even fiscally likely to pass through and to be able to work if you do that, because it's so dirt cheap compared to doing something like restoring a railway, even though the cost would be massively cut down if you're not buying it because it's abandoned legally, so then you can just take it over. It's literally just automatically the county or the state or the city or whatever, right? They just, that's ours now. And so now they didn't have to pay a fucking penny for that. All they have to do is clear it out of what they need for the rights of way and for the safety around the tracks and the electrical areas, so the catenary wires and poles. And then all they have to do is do that, clear that space out. They can leave everything else if they want to, at least temporarily, to save money. But what they're doing with the old trackway is they're recycling everything, which means that they're recycling the literal rails, as in the metal pieces and the railway ties. And I can't remember what all the different things, like the bolts and stuff, that the stakes that you put in and you pin them into the ties and everything else. But the point being is that you have all of that you can now recycle, which is huge, because then you could recycle it, and then with the modern way of recycling and being able to refurbish and upgrade things, you literally could basically use a lot of that, if not all of it, all that metal, in the new tracks, which is fantastic. So then at that point, you still have that recycling you can do. Or if there's going to be somebody who's like super technical and picky about it, and like, you can't do that because it's actually steel now, refined modern steel, and it's different techniques, and therefore it's much higher quality, and the molecular structure is much more tight, and therefore it is not at all, even if they refined the old iron, recycled it into a more modern steel, it still has the components and the compounds of the original metal, and therefore it doesn't have the tight molecular structure that the modern steel works do, that's made from, now, and therefore you still can't use it. Fine, you can sell it. And that will still, especially nowadays, that would make a fuckload of money compared to what it would have made, say, 10 years ago. Because, not just because of inflation, but because there's some weird thing with metal and construction, I think it has to do with the tariffs. It, doubled, if not tripled, the fucking price of all these different kinds of metals. So, they could sell it. And they still have a surplus of money they can make off of that now. Whether they sold it in bulk or not. So, at the end of the day, the factual reality is that that's still a reality that we could play out. And in certain places in this country, that's still a possibility. I just wish that people would fight for that, rather than just settling for good enough with fucking turning them into trails. Because, at least that has that's most likely to get the political willpower and backing and financial backing from investors and from the cities and stuff. Okay, cool. That's cool and all, but you're still stupid for settling. Like, never settle. That's the idea. Almost like, don't quite enter into the territory of nothing's going to be good enough, but get right up against that crossing that threshold. Always be right there, and always demand more. That's my rule of thumb. That's how I operate with that kind of thing. Is there's no excuse. Just keep demanding and pushing. If you're going to fucking do that, especially be politically involved, whether it's going to meetings or whatever else, that's what you need to push for. Never ever settle. Nothing's going to be good enough until it is, basically. And then, make it peak level, because otherwise you're just settling. You're basically saying, yeah, you know what, we'll be a wet doormat. We'll let you walk all over us. We'll let you be like, okay, fine, if this is all we can have, I guess it's sufficient. It's better than what we did have before, which is literally what you're doing by settling for trails just because, what the political willpower and the money is guaranteed to have. Not good enough. That'll never be good enough, because now you're just being fucking lazy. That's the truth of it. And that's something that was always frustrated me about people with that kind of stuff. People get mad at me for ranting against TriMet and ranting about inconsistency and all the bullshit with fucking Max, and they get so mad because they're like, you don't know what you're talking about because blah blah blah, all these costs and this and that, fine. It's like, I do know that. It's still not fucking, it's still no excuse. It's still not good enough, especially as your 5th largest fucking transit agency in the country via annual budget. There's genuinely zero fucking excuse, especially when your next door fucking neighbor transit agency in TCTD, Tillamook County, even through the fucking pandemic, never once had anything, got even close to having a budget issue of any kind. They've never once, I don't think in their history, had a budget deficit. They've never once had a fiscal cliff. They've never once ran into the red. And this is all while they have full service fucking intercity regional lines that they consistently ran, including through the pandemic, including the one all the way from Tillamook to fucking downtown Portland and back. Stopping in Tennisbourne up the road, stopping in Banks. I think they might stop in North Plains, I can't remember. And also making flag stops all along the way. I know they stop in Gales Creek. They stop at this store that's down there, halfway down the Wilson River Highway, Highway 6. So on. But on top of that, and I always have to mention this because of how it is apples to apples, people just says, no, it's apples to oranges. Wrong. You are wrong. I am right. And that's not arrogance, that's a fact. I am right, you are wrong. It is an apples to apples comparison because, again, you're taking the 5th largest biannual budget in TriMet versus one of the smallest in the fucking country in budget annually. And in actual size and services in TCTD, which is literally the fucking next door neighbor transit agency to the west. And they even, during the pandemic, on top of running their full services that they always have, without ever cutting, by the way, a single line, they did never cut back any fucking frequencies either. They were able to run everything normally, as if nothing was happening. And then on top of that, they also took on having to run Lincoln County Transit's line to Grand Ronde and Salem, and thus they also were forced by the state to not just take over that line, but take over Chariots, which is literally Salem, aka the capital fucking transit district's line, between Salem and Grand Ronde. They took over 2 fucking lines that were well outside of the jurisdiction. Imagine being headquartered in fucking Tillamook, in the center of Tillamook County, Oregon, one of the larger counties actually, at least it's one of the largest in the western half of the state, and you're going to have them go all the way down there, all the way south, and all the way into Lincoln City, all the way back north, up through the fucking Salmon River Highway, and then all the way down to fucking downtown Salem, and then all the way back again. And you're running 2 different lines technically at that point. And they did that by state order, without any issues caused to their budget, caused to their frequencies of all their own lines or those 2 lines. Nothing got cut back. No frequencies got cut. Literally nothing got cut. They never got anywhere close to a budget deficit or a fiscal cliff. And that was all through the pandemic too, with record low riderships, and they were still fine. Yet somehow the 5th largest in the country, next door in TriMet, is non-stop in a constant hundreds of millions budget deficit / fiscal cliff. Right. Totally. Because that's how that works. There's no excuse for it. But I digress. Anyway, so At the end of the day, that is how I stand on the rails to trails. And I figured that in this whole urbanism / transit community online, since it's always a fucking war zone if you really dive deep into it like I do, because I'm passionate about transit and urbanism, you're constantly going to be crucified for having only the wrong opinions, and only the wrong beliefs, and only the wrong information, and only wrong data, and everything else, and they're only wrong perspectives, because everybody's at each other's throats all the time, because apparently only one thing can be right. There can be only one! And it's me. So fuck you. How's that? That's right. Suck on my left big toe. I meant to say right, but I'm dyslexic. Anyway, that is my personal feelings and the factual statements I wanted to make about that whole thing, because I know it'd be potentially controversial to a lot of people to hear somebody in this community say such things. But it's true. Nothing I said was non-factual. So, you don't like it, that's tough. As my dad would say, wham, suffer. Okay, go fuck yourself, I'll do it too to myself. Alright, bye-bye.